Good morning, good morning, good morning. How is everybody? I'm going to open up my chat box. Hello, hello, hello. Good morning from the Department of Public Utilities. Hello, good morning from COSI, City Attorney's Office, Ohio State University, Huntington, Buckeye Ranch, Columbus. Oh, hey, everybody. Thank you so much for saying where you're from. This is, I didn't see this as, maybe I didn't notice this the other days, but everybody saying where you're from is super cool. It's so great to see everybody coming in from all over the place. We've got public, we've got private. Wow, good morning, good morning, good morning. Throw your good mornings in there. Good morning from me. I am your, I don't know what I am, your MC, I guess. I'm the person holding your hand and tripping up over the technical difficulties this morning. Well, we are so glad you're here for day 3 of our Govern Diversity and Inclusion Symposium. It has been awesome. It has just been wonderful spending time with you Tuesday and Wednesday, and now opening this morning. I'm just super jazzed about the conversations we've had, the content that our speakers have shared, and some of the richness of what's been unfolded and what's there for us to keep exploring in our spaces, which we're going to talk about a little bit today, how we do some of that work, that unfolding and that explication of ideas into our spaces and into the spheres of influence that we run and roll. So it's so great to see the engagement that's happening. The chat box has been alive and active, and that is, from an event, a virtual event perspective, having that live chat box is so great. So don't stop with your good mornings. Stay involved. I've got some polls across the day, so keep your fingers near the keyboards, and we're going to take some stock of what we're feeling and where we are today. So, anyways, I'm going to start rambling if I start rambling. So it is good. It is good to see you this morning. Just a quick thank you again. Running a 3-day conference with a bunch of folks involved is no easy task, and there were a number of people who helped us do that. Our sponsors, of course, helped us do that. City of Columbus, Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Franklin County, the City of Dayton, and the City of Toledo. Thank you once again for stepping in and supporting this conference. Office of Diversity and Inclusion here from the City of Columbus, thank you for presenting this. It's been amazing to walk with you across this journey of planning and now into the implementation phase. And thinking about this morning, as I know many of you are, what's next? What's coming down the pipeline for us? What's the next meeting? What's the next event? What's the next conversation? Who's the next voice? So we're going to talk about some of that today. Thank you to you all who logged on for day 3. I am not naive enough to think that logging on for a 3rd day to a conference is something that we're going to take for granted. That's huge. Honestly, to me, that speaks to your commitment about what we're talking about here. That speaks to your level of engagement and raising your hand and saying, hey, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of shifting our culture in ways that work better for everybody. And I can't tell you how much that means. Seeing that first day's attendance numbers was so exciting. But showing up here this morning with well over 100 people logged on for day 3, the beginning of hour number 7 or 8 together. How exciting. That's super, super exciting. So thank you to you all. Again, we've got the chat box going, seeing lots of good mornings from everybody. Feel free to add your good morning in there. I'll get mine up and going here in just a second. We're going to keep that chat box live this morning. Also, we'll be doing some breakouts today, as we did yesterday. Although today we're going to run those breakouts a little bit shorter than we did yesterday. I'm going to cut you about 5, 6, 7 minutes earlier. So make sure you jump right into your conversation, because when we come back into this group time, we're going to spend 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes together, just talking back and forth in that chat box. What were some of the takeaways? What were the hot takes of your conversation? What was a trending idea, to see if we can build some ideas, some consensus together around what's next? Because I know the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here in the City of Columbus, myself, we're not interested in creating a plan for everybody else to follow. We're not interested in demanding that everybody think our way or do it our way. That's the opposite of what's happening here. We want it to be an inclusive space. We want to hear back from you to help us inform where we take it. So as we talk about impact today and in our breakout sessions, you're going to have an opportunity to reflect some of your learning. As we get started today, if you would, again, I know some of you, You're still working on that first cup of coffee. I'm working on number 6 maybe, so I'm ready to go. But if you're still working on your first, you might not be ready to type in anything thoughtful into the chat box yet. But if you are, what's your take on yesterday? What a really, really interesting conversation we had about innovation. Is there an idea, a thought, something you've been chewing on, something that hit you? You know, when I asked this question on day 2 about day 1, everybody said Jedi. Jedi was the big thing that was kind of like sparking for people. Actually, one of the folks at the office called me and said when they put my name into their phone in Siri, talking while they're driving, "Hey, call Daniel." It says, my last name is Jude. It says, "Calling Daniel Jedi." And it mispronounces my name like Jedi. So she said, "Wow, you are a Jedi master." So if only. So throw some takeaways. I want to see what you're thinking about. Loving the videos, neurodiversity. That was such an amazing video. And I think that's definitely a place we want to take this conversation in the future. We see a lot about thought and cognitive diversity. And neurodiversity is kind of the scientific angle of that conversation. And we want to be careful that we don't get caught up in, well, everybody thinks different, so we have diversity at the table no matter what. It's not exactly what we mean, right? And there's some nuance to the conversation, lots to explore there. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Oh, Aaron, that's so good. Beth says, failure is okay. Piloting is a great step. Lynn, love intergenerational engagement, the gifts of ADHD. Ask your people, frontline staff are innovative. Experiments. Oh, it's going too fast for me to read now. That's good. That's good. I'm so excited to see some of these. You can't create a process or policy for innovation. Yeah, not a policy. That was something that Paul particularly hit really hard, right? Innovation is a series of small experiments. I love this. I love this. Keep those coming. I'm going to look at those after the event and make sure I didn't miss anything for myself. At the end of this event, as promised, we're going to send you out a resource list, the links to the videos we showed so that you can watch those again, some links to articles that might be helpful for you to reference moving forward. And if there are sort of trending ideas and topics from this, whether we won't share names or anything like that, you've got full privacy. But if there are general ideas like, wow, a lot of people talked about this idea of justice being a big thing for them. How do we incorporate that moving forward? A lot of people were thinking about, innovation and piloting and feeling like they need the opportunity to pilot something on their team and wanting more information on how to do that and how to get manager buy-in or something like that. So you'll have a chance to reflect that out of the breakout session today. As well as anytime you put anything into the chat box. Please do remember, when I copy and paste that chat box out, I see all of your public comments. I think I can also see your private comments. So far, no one has said anything that has been, I don't have the dirt on anybody yet. So unless you want me to get the dirt on somebody, don't private chat anything you don't want me to see, because Zoom will give it all to me when I just say copy that chat box out, okay? All right, I want to switch over to one of the folks from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here in the city of Columbus, Jordan Kaiser. She has been incredibly instrumental in putting this entire conference together from the very first meeting we had about what might we talk about a year ago when we thought about doing a conference for City of Columbus through the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. All the way up to present day, in the last few days, she and I text and leave each other voicemails about 400 times a day about all the little details that we still need to execute. So if you would, welcome Jordan Kaiser, and she's got something she wants to talk about that you've probably got in the mail or maybe coming to you in the mail and that we want to do something at the end of the day with. So Jordan?
Thanks, Daniel. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again today. So as Daniel mentioned, mostly everyone by now should have received your lovely swag box. So, you still feel like you're kind of at a real conference, even though you haven't left your house, but at least you still got a nice little giveaway gift to remember these nice 3 days. And we just wanted to make sure that, we're giving you guys some things to, kind of look at and some safety things. So you've got a nice little mask. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to get your box and look at it. And like I said, if you registered as of, I believe it was Friday, your box might not be there yet, but just hold tight. It will be coming very soon. Delays in mail and everything like that. But we just want to say thanks again and ask at the end of the session, like around 11, I think like 25, 11:30, if you have your swag box with you and you're willing to be on camera, if you would let us take a picture. I thought it'd be really nice to have everyone kind of in their squares holding up their swag boxes, we would really appreciate that. So again, we'll kind of make an announcement, Daniel, maybe a couple minutes right before to remember to bring that. So when we have our last break, if you can go and grab that, that'd be wonderful. So thank you, everyone. Again, we're really thankful to have you here with us.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. I'm seeing some comments. Love the swag box. Love it. Love it. If you haven't gotten it yet, it is a beautiful little gift from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. It's got some goodies in there. You'll see that when you crack it open. So if you haven't yet, do that. And you've got some snacks for today, as well as some cool, fun little items in there. So yeah, running a virtual conference, it's like, how do we make people feel like they're really a part of something? And that was one of the ideas they had. And I'm definitely going to steal it for a future virtual conference, because it's such a cool thing to get a physical thing in the mail about this virtual conference you're attending. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. I want to just again mention, if you haven't turned it on yet, at the bottom of your little toolbar for Zoom, remember you've got a closed captioning option. If that's helpful to you, you can just click the little arrow and say turn captions on. If it's distracting to you, just hit that arrow and say hide captions or turn captions off, and you can hide those. So please use those as necessary. The other thing I wanted to mention was, when you get this list of resources from us after the conference, we'll be including links to watch the general sessions, again, the panel conversations and so forth. So we're not recording your breakout sessions. Those conversations are yours and they're private, but the main sessions we have been, and so you'll get a link to rewatch those or be able to share those out. I did a quick research this morning. There are over 250,000 public sector workers just in Ohio. That's a lot of people who can't be here this morning. And that's a huge sphere of influence as we think about making Ohio cities, communities, townships, neighborhoods better places to live, work, and play for everybody. And we don't want to lose the impact of an event like this. So we'll send all those resources out to you so that you can expand the conversation into your spaces, as well as the video links. All right. I want to do a quick take on, I was thinking about y'all yesterday afternoon after a conversation like yesterday morning when we're talking about innovation, and it's exciting. And I think a lot of us, had sort of this mix of, this is great, this is exciting, I feel empowered and impassioned, and wow, this is hard, and I've tried stuff before and it hasn't worked, or it's hard to get the buy-in of team members or managers or supervisors, and just complicated feelings around that. But I bet a lot of us talked about innovation sometime later in the day, or reflected on conversations we've had about innovating or innovation in our departments. And so I want to just get your take on, when you talk to people, I'm going to launch a poll here. When you talk to people about innovation, what is it that you hear them saying back to you? Maybe it was yesterday afternoon you had a conversation about it. Maybe it was last week or last month. But as you talk about innovation, what's the general sense that you get from people in terms of how they feel about it? What is innovation? Not necessarily according to you, because you're well educated now, but as you talk about it with sort of friends, colleagues, peers, how do you hear them thinking about innovation? Got some responses coming in here. Let's see what's winning so far. Lots of noticing, trying, failing. That was a big part of our conversation yesterday. If that's the conversation you're having with work teams, that's a wonderful place to be starting. Let's see, I've got 58 responses. We're at about 50% now of our votes. I'll give you one more minute to vote, because I'd love to have as much data here as possible. One of the things I think about when we're at a conference or in a space like this is, what do we do with some of this? And as we look here at some of the results, we can get a sense for the ways that we're encountering challenge around innovation. If it's just a cute buzzword, we need to figure out how to talk around that sort of narrative of innovation. If it's some sort of wizardry or magic or something, if it's lots of noticing and trying and failing and people feel like that, then we can sort of unpack some of our own fear around trying it, because if that's the sort of general narrative in our space, then we can lean right into that, right? All right, 10 seconds. I'll give you 10 seconds. Oh, people are still clicking. This is good. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I'm going to end it. So clearly we have a winner, and I bet some of that is as a result of our conversation yesterday, and that's the way it's fresh on your mind. And I hope that some of that is the way that your teams talk about it, and so we lean into that. You'll get again the video about innovation, or the panel talking about innovation yesterday, if that's helpful to you. So, all right, we're going to move forward. I want to set up a couple of framing ideas for our conversation. We have an absolutely fantastic panel coming at you today, really as almost a capstone moment of this conference in terms of talking about inclusion and what some of that means, and how we wrestle with some of those big ideas from systemic and structural racism into how do people feel on our teams, and everything in between. And then talking about innovation and the role that it plays. And we just talked about, I won't go into all that again. But ultimately, the goal is impact, right? Whether we're talking about conversations of diversity and inclusion, or whether we're talking about working in the public sector, right? The result of both of those, the ultimate goal, or in an ideal world, the ultimate goal of both of those is to create impact, right? To create these ripples around you of change and transformation and impact. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And we've got some phenomenal people coming in to do it. And I'll introduce our moderator and let him handle those introductions and that panel conversation, about 15 minutes here. I just wanted to set up some sort of guiding thinking around this before we get into the panel. Our panel today is composed of chief diversity officers, and that's a very specific position with a very specific role. And I will let them sort of talk about it from their lens, because I don't want to pretend I know what all of those things entail for each of them in their different spaces. But the reality is that not all of us are chief diversity officers, right? And we've all got really different scopes of influence and impact. And a lot of us, our roles or our jobs or the competencies that we need to perform are not directly related to diversity and inclusion strategies and policies and practices and procedures. And so I wanted to pause for a minute before we get into this large scale sort of institutional thinking around transformational change from the perspective of these chief diversity officers. And just wanted to note that when we talk about change, many people will say they want things to change. And very few people actually want to change, right? Because it's much easier to talk about or to think about the things or the people around us that are broken or that we don't like. It's much harder to be introspective and look inward and interrogate ourselves a little bit and say, hey, well, what might be going on for me? How might I need to shift or change or transform? So I want to give you just a model for thinking about transformational change from an individual perspective, so that you can use that as a lens to hear some of the conversation from our panel and hopefully translate it into your world in effective ways. Because I know for me, when I hear top level executives speak, there's almost a lens that needs to happen, right? Because they're talking about the opportunities that they have at a different level. And so I want to provide that lens for us. The first thing I want to do real quick is I'm just curious, as we start a conversation about transformational change, where you come in on this. Okay, for me, and this is just my lens, I've noticed that when people talk about change, impact, and transformational growth, they often mean other people, not themselves, right? And I'm curious what your take on why is. We naturally want others to change and adapt around us. It's more comfortable. Option two, it's just easier to hope other people change, because change is hard and painful. Do you think it's because most people don't see themselves as needing to change, right? They don't see the things that need to shift in their own lives, and so they never even begin that process. We got some folks saying most people seem to weigh their intentions as good, right? Hey, I meant good, I mean good, I'm a good person. And so they don't really do constructive interrogation of their own beliefs and behaviors. And last option, many people don't even know how to start the process. We know what we don't like in other people, but don't often know how to shift that for ourselves. I'll give you about 15 seconds to get your thoughts in, or 30 seconds here. I know some of those answers are a little bit longer. I'm curious, as we start a conversation today about transformational change, how you see that laying out. All right. Looks like we got a lot of reviews, and I'll give you 10 seconds here, and then I'll close this poll and we'll move on. All right. What do we got here? Most people don't see themselves as needing to change or transform, and so don't start. How interesting. Second place answer looks like most people weigh their intentions as good, and so don't interrogate their own behaviors. And third is most don't even know how to start that process. Wow. That's not good, but I think it's a good place to be and a good thing to recognize as we start this morning, because I think that's where we're going to take the conversation through the rest of the morning. When I think about transformational change, I have a kind of a 3-step process that I think about for myself. Things that it's not a recipe. It doesn't work and look exactly the same for each person, but it's a roadmap for myself. And there are some guideposts along the roadmap for myself to transform and shift and change myself to stay in growth mode and learning and development mode. As I think about wanting to be an impact player in the world, what needs to change in me. And so I wanted to share that 3-step process with you this morning, again, just as a lens to hear the rest of this conversation from these chief diversity officers. The first step, or the first roadmap for me, is awareness. All 3 of these words will start with A, okay? Just because, as many of you know, I'm slightly obsessed with alliteration. So everything I do always, I have to make it start with the same letter, or I feel some kind of way about it. So this is awareness. And really awareness is about noticing what's going on in me, right? If I've got a group of people I'm working with and I'm really unhappy with a couple of people in the team, and I really don't like the way they do things and they rub me the wrong way and all these things, the first step is self-awareness, right? What's going on in me when this person, quote unquote, rubs me the wrong way, right? What's happening in me? And it's like this personal antenna goes up. And at this point, it's not about evaluation, right? It's not about blame or shame. In fact, it's the opposite. Any energy you spend on feeling guilty about those things in the first step of this process is energy you're not spending on the next 2 steps in terms of actually shifting the belief or the behavior, in terms of engaging in the transformation. So there's no guilt, blame, or shame. We're just noticing. It's an awareness of what's going on in me. If somebody says something and my thought is, oh, they just don't get it, or whatever the thought is, right? Why? Where's that coming from in me? And I'm paying attention to what's happening in me. It reminds me, there's a theory in evolutionary biology that's really about noticing, and I love it. And I'm not a scientist, so if you work in the sciences, you know, DM me privately to correct me, because I want to get the story right. But there's this theory, you know, we've got in the story, in the narrative of evolution, we've got this this big shift that happens, right? Animals, living things, are in the water. They're in swampy areas. They're in the water. They live underwater. They use gills to breathe. At some point in mass, these animals, or at least portions of them, come out of the water, right, up onto the land. And for a long time, just the sort of general public understanding is, well, yeah, there's obviously an organ in the bodies of these animals that shifts, that changes so that they can get out of the water onto the land. And of course, that's, you know, gills need to change to lungs so that we can breathe. Well, that's not true, right? Of course, that shift happens, but there's some theories now questioning why. Why did that shift take place? And so there are some theories coming into play around the organ that shift actually being the eyes, right? That fish eyes started to shift toward the top of their heads, more like lizards, if you think about a lizard with the eyes coming to the top of the head versus the sides. And fish could start raising their heads a little bit out of water and seeing land around them that was teeming with insect life at the time, a very abundant food source. And so their vision shifted from underwater, which isn't great vision, even for fish, and competition for food sources. And then they saw something new, right? And the new opportunity, they had new physical vision. And so there was a new motivation to change. That's what self-awareness is, right? It's this new vision that brings fresh motivation to change. I pay attention to what's going on around me. The second step is acknowledgement. And this is just what Dr. Jana talked about the other day, right? I acknowledge my role in this. I acknowledge whatever's happening, how I contribute to it, maybe how I benefit from it, how I'm complicit in it, maybe how I can affect it, right? I acknowledge I have a responsibility here, right? I can either abdicate my responsibility in my own change, or I can accept it, right? And we can see this playing out on personal and organizational levels. There was a bank CEO the other day that said, hey, there's just not enough Black talent to hire, right? And that's an abdication of responsibility. Hey, you have a role to play here, and you don't just get to say the resources don't exist. There's another bank CEO that said the opposite. There's plenty of people to hire. We just have to make sure when they get here, we are a place they want to stay. You can look at the story of those two banks and the representation of people of color employees at management levels in those banks, and the company whose leader said there's just not enough Black talent to hire. Their Black representation in senior leadership has gone down 50% over the last 4 years. The bank and the organization whose leader said there's plenty of people to hire, we need to work on creating inclusive space so that they stay, their Black representation in senior leadership has gone up 400% in the same time frame. When we abdicate responsibility, we don't make change. When we accept it, we do. And the last thing is action. We take action, and that's about intentionality, right? It's about understanding my beliefs influence my behaviors, and I take action on them. So we're aware, we acknowledge, and we act. That's the lens I use to think about my own personal transformation and where I take that and what I do with it. That can be a lens for you as we move into this next part of our conversation. This action piece is really about understanding that all of my behaviors are informed by belief. So that when I have a belief, it informs my behaviors. And if I don't like the behavior, I got to go back to the belief cause, right? And for me, parenting was a really easy way to see this. When I believed that I was raising my kids, the behaviors that I exercised were about control and domination and possession. You're mine. Behave, don't embarrass me, all those sorts of things. When I shifted into a belief of, well, I'm raising humans, they're going to be full live humans and they're their own people, my behaviors toward them in terms of my parenting tactics skilled. I want to empower them to make the decisions that are right for them, not for me. Those shifts exist in all of our worlds, in all of our lives, in all of our spheres of influence. So maybe that's a helpful lens for you. I hope it is. We become aware of what's happening in us. We accept and acknowledge the responsibility that we play in the role of our own transformation, and we act on it. We understand what do I believe, and we shift into behaviors that reflect the beliefs we want to reflect into the world. So with that, I am so excited to welcome, we're a couple minutes early, but I'm trying to get out of the way of this awesome panel because I can't wait to get them up here. We've got Marlon Moore as our moderator. Marlon is a fantastic person. He is formerly the Chief Diversity Officer until recently of Huntington, headquartered here in our fair city, and has recently started his own consulting firm, Marlon Moore Consulting Incorporated, as he seeks to drive his impact across an even wider footprint. And then I'm going to let him introduce our panelists because he doesn't need me to hold his hand in the whole moderation business, and I'm going to let him handle it however he'd like. So, Marlon, if you were there, I want to pass this show over to you.
Good morning. I am here. Thank you, Daniel. And first of all, congratulations on coordinating a successful conference. I want to thank the City of Columbus and my good friend, Dr. Stallings Johnson, and your wonderful team for bringing us together over the past 3 days. Now, listen, this panel is a distinguished panel of leaders. I've had the fortune and pleasure to work with each and every one of you. You are highly respected for what you do, and I consider you a friend. But after watching the past two debates, and I'm not suggesting this is a debate, but each one of you could probably take up an hour and a half of talking about this topic. So I want to make sure we remain friends after today. So I would humbly ask that you be respectful of the time, and don't let me have to use this little red microphone button down at the bottom of my screen to mute anyone. But in all seriousness, I am so looking forward to the discussion today because I think it's very, very much appropriate with the environment that we're in and you all are uniquely prepared to lead the discussion, quite honestly, on transformation and change and how we do that in our environment. So pleased to have with us this morning, as Daniel mentioned, I am Marlon Moore, president of Marlon Moore Consulting, formerly a chief diversity officer myself with Huntington Bank, and really looking forward to continuing to work with everyone who joined us today. But as far as our panel, we have Marcus Miller, the chief diversity officer for the city of Chicago. We have Dr. Beverly Stallings Johnson, our host, the chief diversity officer for the city of Columbus. We have Angela Bretz, vice president and chief diversity officer for Nationwide. And last but certainly not least, we have Kiana Williams, who's the vice president and chief diversity and inclusion officer for Ohio Health. Let's give a virtual round of applause to see some claps going and hand waves for our panelists today. So panelists, please feel free to unmute your lines. We have a number of questions that we'll try to cover, but we want to make sure we hear from the audience as well. So I'll look to end the sort of formal part of our conversation at a reasonable time. Feel free to send in your questions via chat, and the D&I team, if you need to get those over to me, please do, and I will make sure to read those. So let me step out of the way. Now, for those of you all who know me, I'm supposed to follow a script usually, but I struggle with that. And today is not going to be any different. So, Daniel conjured up a thought in my mind as I was listening to his open remarks. And I know each and every one of you can handle this question. So I'm just going to put it out there, and Dr. Johnson, Stallings Johnson, I'm actually going to start with you. But I'd like every one of the panelists to answer this question. It's very simple. Using one word, or if you think about one trait that every D&I practitioner, someone who's responsible for leading change in the D&I space, what's the one trait that everyone should exhibit or possess?
There are multiple words, and Marlon, you can't put me in a box and just give me one word, but I'll try. Okay, that's not a trait that I typically have, but if there's one word, and I think the people that have worked with me and they know this about me, and I know all of the panelists here, it's the possibilities. Because we look at the challenges and we look at the things that are in front of us and the things behind us. And the one thing that helps us, our beacon, our guiding light as a CDO, and whatever the realm that we're following in, state, local, or corporate America, it's the possibilities of where we need to be and where we need to go. So the word possibilities.
I like that. I like that. Thank you. Marcus, what say you?
The word for me is grace. It's important for a variety of reasons, but mainly because in a lot of situations, as you know, we are teaching people things that they never knew before. We are refreshing their thinking, and oftentimes it requires us to meet them where they are. And so for me, it really is extending a manner of and a measure of grace, because everyone's not going to be where you are, but your goal is to move them to where they need to be.
I appreciate that, Marcus. I wish you and I could have this conversation a long time ago. Grace is so important. Thank you for sharing that for those who have joined us today. Ms. Kiana, what would you say?
My word would probably be change agility. We have to be ready to move on a dime. You think about the current environment that we're in, the current civil rights movement, a lot of organizations had to shift and be ready to respond. And so, you might have new CEOs, you might have new leaders, you might have people in different places on the change curve. So you being prepared to be change agile, I think, is really important.
Great point. Thank you. Angela?
Marlon, I'd have to say my word would be empathy, a greater ability for us to experience walking in different shoes and examining life through a different lens, recognizing that there is absolute power in appreciating and embracing difference.
Wow, that is phenomenal. You all see, I knew you could handle it. So thank you for being flexible here. Great comments. So want to go back to something you said, Dr. Stallings Johnson, the possibilities. When you think about possibilities, can you talk about a significant transformation that you or your team have helped to execute of late?
Absolutely. When I think of the possibilities and I think about what all of us are tasked to do in our tenure and going forward to lay the pathway for others that follow us, one of the things that we are doing here in the city, and you may or may not have seen the recent announcement to add to our current transformation journey, because it is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take multiple very deliberate steps. We just launched something called the 30 by 30 challenge. And under Mayor Andrew Ginther and everyone participated on the panel on Monday. One of the things that he mentioned was our 30 by 30 challenge to ensure that the city, as we move forward under his equity agenda, is a diverse and inclusive workspace. So what is the 30 by 30 challenge? So this is all about helping us look at ourselves to eradicate, eliminate systemic racism. And so we're starting to look at ourselves in the lens of where are we from a workforce, growth from a supplier diversity, spin perspective, our executive leadership, boards, commissions, and say, are we where we should be? And if not, what are we starting to do to put things in place so that we can move forward? And as I said, 30 by 30, the mayor has tasked us to do this in 30, was 36 months, but now we're down to 30 months. So 30 by 30 by 30 to hit workforce, supplier diversity, executive and boards and leadership. That's one of the things that we are focused on. We're in the process of this transformation, this journey under the equity agenda. And in 30 months, we're going to start to see those milestones move.
That's phenomenal. Thank you. And just to follow up on that, Kiana mentioned the word agility earlier. As you think about your transformational change process, what role does agility play in that for you all?
You want?
Yes, yeah.
For me, in terms of agility, I don't want to kind of hog this conversation because I'm impassioned about this 30 by 30, because I think it's the framework where we have to go. We have to be agile enough to recognize we may not be where we want to be today. So with that understood, we have to look at the environmental factors. We have to look at the culture. We have to look at what's happening from a political spectrum to say, how do we then look at our end goal, the 30 by 30 challenge, and put the right enablers in place with the right partnerships, the right tools and processes to help people move forward. And it's not a set ABC directive. I'm finding myself moving up and down and across the spectrum at every given time to say, from a workforce perspective, here are some of the things that we have to do, working with my partners in human resources and civil service to help us move these forward. So the agility is every couple of weeks, there is a new thing that we're adding to our plan to help us move forward with our 30 by 30 strategy.
Great point. Angela, Marcus, Kiana, any significant transformations that you all like to speak about?
I'll speak to one, Marlon, a significant transformation that we've implemented. It's been a couple years ago now, and we continue to evolve it. It's creating a space for our associates to have safe conversations about societal events. With the social unrest that is upon us now, we feel that it is critically important to create that space in a work environment for our associates. So we began having Catalyst for Change sessions, and they're designed to educate and inform, as well as empower our associates to kind of be that change for good, be that catalyst for change, not only in the workplace, but also in the communities. So in those sessions, we have guests that are both local and national civic leaders, and they discuss current issues. Our associates are able to ask. We have a live Q&A question, and some of those guests have included members of the Senate and Congress, both Democratic and Republican, so that we can show both sides, mayors, city council members, commissioners, law enforcement members, and we also engage with some of our social justice organizations like the National Urban League or the National Fair Housing Alliance, and have them on. Additionally, we also engage with our senior leaders and have them share their thoughts and perspectives. And then lastly, we have regular leader listening sessions, and we do that so that we can have intentional checkpoints with our associates, just to check in with them and allow them to share what's on their hearts and minds. And we listen for that understanding and have really found that we have had a lot of great growth internally just from sharing with one another.
That's so important, Angela. Thank you for sharing that. Creating a space for your team members to have a conversation is so important. Congratulations on that effort. Marcus or Kiana, anything from either of you?
I'll share that since January, I've been part of our Office of Equity and Racial Justice within the Mayor's office. And our framework, or the framework we began building before we all had to tackle COVID-19, was truly built on this concept of transformation, because it was based on addressing racial equity and establishing it within the unique context of Chicago and our hypersegregation and other factors, but establishing it as a way to not call out people, but to call them into a conversation around what it means to have equity. And by framing it as racial equity with the lead, we would then be able to take on other forms of equity, gender equity, ability equity, et cetera. So transformation truly been the marker that we've established for our success going forward.
That's excellent, excellent. Thank you, Marcus, for sharing that. Kiana?
Yeah, so Marlon, first of all, I love all the examples that all the panelists shared. What I'll add to that is, two things that I think that we've done that, I'm particularly proud of from the standpoint of catalyzing change. One is really looking at diversity and inclusion as bigger than an HR effort, right? So a lot of times we really spend time thinking about what the workforce looks like, what our leadership looks like. And all of those things are critical and important, but we also have to think about how diversity and inclusion touches every aspect of the business so that it's not just kind of over here in the corner of HR. So what we've done is thought about how does diversity and inclusion impact our patients, right? Our patients are our North Star. And so we've established specific metrics to improve the experience for all of our patients. Supplier diversity, I think Beverly talked about that as well. But then also we're looking at how do we make healthcare accessible? And so how do we plant in communities that historically have not had access to healthcare? How do we improve healthcare outcomes for communities who historically have not? How do we use technology to connect to those communities as well? And so it's really about thinking about diversity and inclusion as touching every aspect of our strategy. And then the last thing that I'll share is around accountability. So, we all, know that what you measure matters. And so what we've done is not only establish metrics, but tie those to executive and leadership bonuses, right? We know that that's a best practice for diversity and inclusion to move organizations along on the journey is to actually have your leaders have skin in the game. And so we've made that a priority.
That is phenomenal, Kiana. Kudos to you and your organization. We know that that's a best practice tied to compensation and performance review. So great job with that. So Kiana, you opened it up. So I gotta walk in the door. Metrics, accountability, data, so very important. And sometimes in some organizations, I know somebody out here is looking for that data set and can't access it. So what would you all say? Why is that important? Why do we hear so much about data and the metrics and what are you all measuring to pursue and help facilitate transformational change? Marcus, can I start with you?
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting that you've honed in on data, because I would argue I won this job by focusing on data and the significance of that data in strategic decision making. We're looking at a number of measures, and I don't mind telling you that Chicago is probably more uniquely situated to use data than a lot of places, because we have both the hypersegregation that's always very well known, but we also have had scenarios where we haven't actually utilized the strength of the communities that we're part of. And so to Kiana's point, we've been looking at how we use this data to create problems, solutions in ways that we hadn't even thought of before. And the reason for that is because you can't argue with it. I mean, it is what it is. And I don't say that to be, facetious. The data tells us things that allow us to make decisions that we can then use to launch, initiatives. And for us, it's been powerful, especially as we had to deal with the COVID-19 situation. Our chief equity officer and our deputy mayor for education, whose father and mom, by the way, are in Columbus, actually used data to address the high cases of COVID-19 in Black and Brown communities, and it made a huge difference. So we've taken that approach and looked at how we make a lot of decisions across the board, and the data has saved us in every instance.
That's a great example. Great example. Beverly, go ahead.
Yeah, Marlon, I just wanted to build on what Kiana said because she's so right. Where I came from in corporate America, every leader said, you can't expect what you can't inspect. And as we look at data, and this is a shift from the traditional thinking from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And I know Angela, Marquise, Kiana, all of us have had these conversations around, we have to make this transformation journey. So it's just not about the traditional human resource EEO approach when it comes to diversity. It's bigger than that. Marlon, you've heard me get on my soapbox around, we've got to look at changing the overall culture in a workplace. And by setting bold new goals, which is one of the things, again, I'm touting the mayor's equity agenda and what we're doing with our 30 by 30 challenge, we're looking at workforce and supplier. Got it. But it's one step beyond that, because we're looking at the possibilities and we're saying this is a business imperative. I don't care whether or not you're state, local, or corporate, this is a business imperative. All of us are probably familiar with the McKinsey studies that talk about the profitability of ensuring that we have diverse leadership, diverse people, representative of the communities that we serve and the corporate organizations we serve, because that drives profit, as well as in the case of supplier diversity, it drives the revenue base inside of the city. So people are participating, businesses are growing. So it's bigger than just the traditional, we're evolving, it's transformational, but we can't expect what we don't inspect, which is why, this panel is spot on with the things that we're saying that we have to look at from a workforce and a supplier spend perspective. It drives that bottom line.
Sure, thank you. Somebody need to put that in the chat, please. Expect, and give Beverly the credit, please. Expect what you can't. So help me out, Beverly. Expect.
Can't expect what you can't inspect.
Yeah, Daniel, let's get that out there, please. Credit to Beverly.
Like taglines, and the business of diversity. That's what these two things are.
I love it. I love it. So listen, you all, I'm all for it. Data, accountability, metrics make sense. But let's go a little deeper. I got to press you a little bit. And this aligns with one of the questions that just came in. All your plans and strategies sound great. But you need stakeholder involvement and engagement. Angela, maybe you want to take the first stab at this, but can you talk about how you've won the hearts and minds of some of your partners to participate? How do you get people moving in the right direction?
For us, Marlon, I would have to say it absolutely starts at the top, at the very top of your organizations. I think you have to have that unwavering commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. And to Beverly's point, it is absolutely a business imperative. It's not that thing, as you heard Kiana mention, that you kind of put to the side that's just HR. It's absolutely a business imperative. And I think you have to start at the top with that support. And you have to be willing to challenge yourselves and be intentional about the things that you don't see, that you don't have, or the things that you have and you don't like. So it involves support and commitment at the very top of the house, having an intentional plan, and then staying with that plan and executing. I think you've heard several people say that DE&I is an absolute journey. I think sometimes we're looking for that more immediate reaction or response or improvement, and it just doesn't happen that quickly. So I would say you have to stay the course and be very intentional about your plan.
That's a great point. Kiana, it would have been really easy to just stay on workforce diversity, supplier diversity. How did you get your organization to start looking at the impact to patients?
Yeah, well, so absolutely what Angela said, right? It starts at the top, having that senior leadership involvement, having that senior leadership buy-in. But from there, it's really about looking at the data. And so we were really intentional to go deep and to look broadly at data. And we let the data tell us where we should go. And so that's how we got to our patient population, right? Like that's our North Star, that's our reason for being. And so having any type of strategy that was absent of our patient experience would mean that, again, we were really just doing an initiative. We weren't trying to do something that was going to be embedded in our DNA. We weren't trying to fundamentally change our culture. And then the other thing that I'll say is that, we use other data sources, right? So we looked at our engagement survey and we started to break our engagement survey down by demographic groups. So we wanted to see what was happening with African American associates in our culture, what was happening with LGBTQ associates in our culture, how was their experience different from white associates, for instance. And then, with our patient population, looking across the demographics, what were the experiences of female patients? What were the experiences of, Hispanic patients, so on and so forth, right? And so as you start to break down and really get clear on what your data will tell you where you should focus. Your data will tell you what the story you should be telling to the organization. And the only other thing that I'll add, kind of before letting somebody else get in here too, is that it's also really important to look at the intersectionality of the data. Right. So a lot of times we talk about men's experience, and then what we do is we end up lumping men of color in with the experience of white men, and their experience is vastly different. And so if we don't look at the intersections in the data as well, we won't fundamentally understand what's happening in our organizations and where we need to lean in.
Very well said, Kiana. Thank you. Marcus, you had a ton of stakeholders in your role. How do you win minds and hearts?
Well, the good news, Marlon, is we are still on our journey. It's a new journey in comparison to the colleagues on the panel. The city didn't have a chief diversity officer. I was the first in April of 2018. And one of the first things I did was take the data that was available and set up some pilot programs with departments. We have 34 departments, and of those 34, and this gets back to my point about grace, several of them were very, very open and enthusiastic about working within a DEI context. Others of them weren't. But the ones that I was able to start with, I worked with the individuals from a couple of vantage points. One, from the HR standpoint, but then also looking at their relationship to the various communities that they serve, because everyone, despite what they might have believed, was in the customer service business. And the result to this point has been some exciting second stage pilots that we're going to be able to establish, both by using the data, but also by, to your point, winning them over with, if we do these things, these are the positive results that will occur, and these are going to all benefit us in delivering services. And I might add really quickly, because we have a residency requirement with the city of Chicago, all of the things that happen in community are also happening to our employees. And I think that created more of a, not only sense of urgency, but a sense of purpose for some of the programs that we established.
Great point, you all. Another question that just came in, and
Mark, can I build on something Kiana said? Because sure. Kiana was spot on. There's a couple of questions in the chat box that says, how do you get this thing moving? Well, how do you start your transformation? And there's something that's so incredibly important. And I don't know if all the other CDOs are not as lucky as we are, but if you don't have buy-in from the leadership at the top, where they have now drawn the line to say, here's my vision, here's where I want to go from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective, or whatever their vision may be. But in this case, the DE&I perspective that's aligned and coherent. And then most importantly, as again, I reframe this from my perspective. Our mayor and I are looking at this from a business imperative perspective. And so, there are going to be challenges where you have the mindsets. There was another question in here that someone said, how do you change the mindsets? Well, I don't know if any of us can really change the mindsets of anybody. But I know one thing, that we can probably help people understand and see a shared goal that's tied to the business end goal that impacts all of us. That's kind of where we're headed, versus me changing the mindset. Unconscious bias training is not going to, flip a switch and change anybody anywhere. That's one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I responded to, because someone asked about anti-bias and anti-racist education. Will it fix anyone? No, it's not going to fix anyone. This is bigger than that. And just to kind of close this out, so if we don't have the vision at the top, and if they're not aligned and they're not focused and they haven't said, here's where we're going. And most importantly, in my case, if I didn't have the coalitions and support of my department heads, who are also all committed and have said, here's where we need your help, from human resources to civil service to Department of Technology. All of my coalitions, my department heads, the CEOs of their departments have been instrumental in setting that tone for their organizations as well on this journey. We're not there yet. It's a journey for a reason. And that's one of the things I wanted to kind of build on what Kiana said.
Yeah.
And metrics matter. Metrics matter. Metrics matter. Metrics matter.
Thank you for that. And Kiana, before I come to you really quick and we move on to affinity groups, some of the questions that have come in, and Kiana, I'll start with you. So what are you measuring? We talked about metrics. What are some of the things you're measuring, and how are you getting the data? Kiana?
Yep. So it's a great question. So number one, what we measure, and I think a number of people have touched on this, is we measure what does our leadership population look like, right? And so what we've decided where we wanted to start is at our manager and above population, because there's tons of research that shows that diversity begets diversity. And so as you bring in diversity at those leadership levels, you generally should see more diversity at that pipeline level. So we start out looking at what does our leadership population look like? And that's from a workforce standpoint. And then, like I said, we look at our engagement data and we cut that across demographic groups to look at what is the experience of our associates at every level and every demographic. So that's from a workforce standpoint: retention, promotion, advancement, all of those traditional things that you look at from an HR standpoint. Then what we look at from our physician standpoint is one, do our physicians mirror the communities that we're in, and where do we have opportunity? And so we look at national benchmarks to say, does our physician workforce look like what it should look like based on national benchmarks? From our patient standpoint, we're looking at the experience of our patients. So we do a survey through Press Ganey, where if you come into any experience of gender, so who are vendors, how can we increase that? And again, we look at where they're accessing us. Are they accessing us through the emergency department, which, as you know, is more than they are going to a PCP? And so how do we transaction? So how did you put that together? So look at whatever your measure has, but you're measuring something. So opportunities, right? And I started to share that work. They can make or break it. And so you have to get to that level too and help them understand. We do a lot of storytelling, and I'm sure the other panelists, and I know Marlon has done a lot around storytelling, but you have to do the storytelling as well.
Yeah.
And the one last thing I'll say, Marlon, and then I'll see, I'm good with that. Like, I don't need everybody to go out and disperse.
The panelists, including myself, would be happy to respond to email, but I'd like but as important your business resource groups or employee resource groups, BRGs, ARGs, whatever you call them, inclusion councils, how do you
groups, ARGs are the company, and it's a great story for them to be able to connect with potential talent coming into the company. One, they can see the representation that we have, and then hear stories from frontline associates about what our culture and what it's like to work at Nationwide. So we leverage both ARGs and resource groups in that way. Additionally, they are both very active in our community. So when we, like the Latina Festival here in Columbus, when we have local activations for different festivals or Heritage Month celebrations, that's all through our associate resource groups and business unit councils.
That's excellent. Thank you. Anyone else like to opine on the question? How do you involve your employee resource or affinity groups to capture all to support transformational change?
I'll jump in and say we are literally at the very start of establishing ERGs, BRGs. In fact, for the better part of a year, I've been working off and on with colleagues like Dr. BSJ and others from around the country, looking at what are the kinds of elements that have to go into a municipal employee resource group. As I mentioned, and I just don't say this as an excuse, the city of Chicago is on a new journey, but with Mayor Lightfoot's leadership, there's two components of this that I think are going to be beneficial to us. One, we're going to establish these city resource groups as part of a wellness strategy, because we do believe that the wellness of our employees is paramount, especially in the high quality delivery of public services. The other piece of this is, because we have the data to use that we did not have before, we'll be able to hopefully create more cross-pollination within our employee groups, something that most people couldn't conceive of because we were very siloed. And I think the change that we're going to make with those two aspects is going to be really, really transformational for us.
That's excellent.
So Marlon, we don't have the traditional BRGs, ERGs, or ARGs yet here at the City of Columbus, but in my prior role, we had BRGs globally. And I recognize the value and the impact of having shared commonalities in groups like that. And as we launch, and we're like Marquise, we're moving in towards starting to establish them. We recognize two things, and I keep talking about coalitions and working with our departments, because it doesn't all happen through the office of this office. I've got to make sure that we have our stakeholders on the front lines. They're listening, they're supporting, and that's where BRG, ERGs are going to come to play for us, because they will help us move this shared vision forward, so that we're all leaning in, stepping up and stepping into this objective of the equity agenda for the City of Columbus.
That's excellent. So I want to pause for a quick second and just check in with you all. We have about 9 minutes. I have a number of questions I still want to get to. So I want to try to get to these questions, and at 10 o'clock, I want to pivot and really open it up to all the phenomenal questions that have come in. So we're going to push through the list that we have. And then I want to pause at 10 to really make sure we can get to some of the questions that come in. So let's loosen it up a little bit. I was the day-to-day Chief Diversity Officer, and now I'm a solo proprietor, entrepreneur, and my days look a little different. So I'd like to ask you all, what does a typical day look like for you as a change agent?
I don't know if there is a typical day.
There isn't a typical day, Marlon. I mean,
Well, listen, that's how the question was listed. What does a typical day look like?
that's like telling us, give us one word. Marlon, you're putting us in the box again.
Hey, you can do it. Work through it.
Yeah,
But you
there's
know what,
not a
Marlon?
day, but go ahead, Marcus.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't know exactly how each of the colleagues and panelists' days are, but I would bet money that they've each started out with a plan or framework and fight tooth and nail to work within that plan, given some of the exigencies that occur, especially in our context, but also in the corporate space. My day is spent looking at, okay, what do I need to accomplish based on the plan that I have? And I love Kiana's term, bicycling around. I do a lot of that, checking with people, touching base, all toward moving as fast or as slow as necessary toward the goals that I've established within that framework. That's usually what my day consists of.
So Marlon, my day, as I think about it, again, going back to my group, and I'm going to mention it again, and this is not an infomercial, but the 30 by 30 challenge. It's pretty, my star is there. Here are my metrics. Metrics matter. And my day is an EDA, and my EDA is enabling, driving, and achieving those things that I talked about over and over and over again. And there's so many different components inside of that, whether it's workshops to job fairs, to outreach efforts, to community. There's so many things that tie into that, but my day is EDA, enabling, driving, and achieving those goals.
That's
I
excellent.
love that, Beverly. Yeah, well, there's not
Yeah.
a typical day in this space. I will say, I do spend a significant amount of my time consulting with leaders and reviewing their people strategy, which includes D, E, and I. So that is a nice chunk of my time. But as Marcus and Beverly, and I'm sure Kiana, we may set out to have a plan for the day, and it just never comes to fruition that way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. One of the things I'll say is, and this kind of ties to the point that Marcus made about grace and Angela made about empathy, is I start every day with a moment of prayer, setting the intention, because this work is heavy work, right? And so, one of the things that I think that, people have to remember is, folks who do this work have a level of resilience that is generally, above and beyond the norm. And one of the things that, so I also have responsibility in my organization for culture and engagement as well. And so really thinking about kind of the intersections of those worlds is really important every single day. But one of the areas that I've distorted a lot of my energy to is coaching. So coaching our leaders on how they build inclusive teams, how they build engagement into their workforce, how they really become champions of our culture. Because for us to move the needle on the work that we're trying to do, we have to have leaders who are walking the walk and talking the talk every single day. Because one of the things that I found, and I think there's a ton of research on this, is our associates are watching our leaders. And so if our leaders are somehow not aligning with the mission, or somehow espousing something that is contrary to what we say we want to accomplish, then associates aren't going to do what we need them to do from an inclusion standpoint. So, spending my time coaching our leaders to be able to role model the behaviors is where I'm spending a lot of my time.
That's a good point, Kiana. And I want to preface this next question. It's a heavy question. And so no box created. It is a heavy question. And if you all can give me the most succinct answer possible, that would be great. But your responses of late are touching a few things for me. And I think about the recent societal unrest. And I think about your role as change agents, advocates, champions. So I want to ask you, is creating an inclusive environment more an issue of helping people figure out what to do at the individual level, or supporting them driving strategic change, transformational change at the organizational level? I know a lot of you probably got calls. Hey, what do I do? Who do I say? What book do I read? How can I help? Is that whose role is it?
Yeah, for me, Marlon, it's a both and, right? So I'm laughing because, to your point, we had an issue where a manager reached out to me and said, my associate's doing X, Y, and Z. Should I just have them read White Fragility, right? So to your point, sometimes people do think it's just a matter of reading a book, but I really do think it's a both and. I mean, we have to have institutional change, right? We have to change the fabric of who our organizations are, right? Those biases that are built into the processes that we've had in place for 40, 50 years, right? We have to dismantle that. But at the end of the day, it's people who make up the organization, right? The people are the culture. Our leaders are the culture. And so you do have to change those individual actors as well. And while I 1,000% agree with Angela about empathy and Marcus about grace, there are some times where you also have to draw a firm line, right? Like if these behaviors, if these actions don't align with who we are as an organization, this might not be the right place for you, as an individual. And so that to me is part of that individual action, but also, the institutional policies, the institutional framework. And so I honestly don't believe you can have one without the other.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kiana. And I keep going back to this, but at the end of the day, whatever organization we're in, this is not only a business imperative, it's a business requirement. And I think all of our leaders, again, going back to making sure that the tone and the vision is set from the top. And our equity agenda, it's our North Star. We know this is what we should be doing above and beyond all of the daily activities. That's what we know we're all leaning in towards. And that includes the leadership, middle management. We all know that's where we're going. Our leader believes in it. We know that that's the change that we can go after. That's a change that we should be measuring. And it takes some education, like Kiana just said. I spent a lot of time informing, but I removed the J word from my vernacular for a reason. You guys want to know the J word, the judgment word from my vernacular, because again, people come from different disciplines, backgrounds, etc. As we heard with Dr. Jana mention on Monday, was it Tuesday? I forget which day we're in, but Tuesday, when there was someone that asked, how do I refer to people of color at this point? People come from different places. People understand things differently. So I had to remove the judgment word from my mindset to say, help me help you, so that you can lean in and step in and do the things that this mayor is asking from an equity agenda that will drive business results for the city from a workforce perspective to attract that diverse talent and retain it. Also from a supplier diversity, our MWBE, so we can grow their businesses in the community. And ultimately that holistic model is the revenue that will keep this city alive and keep people employed. And oh, by the way, keep the productivity up, because we have a culture that's inclusive and protective and supportive of folks.
Yeah, we're building the same type of framework, but I'd be lying if I said it hadn't been challenging. And what I had to do, to Beverly's point, is not own the responsibility for helping and teaching, as in this particular instance, as much as setting a table for there to be courageous conversations. And that's really what we've called them. The departments that took this on, they took on the ownership of having those conversations as they were relevant to their day-to-day. And as I mentioned a moment ago, because all of our employees are residents, the things that were happening in their communities where stores were closed because of rioting and looting, there was angst and concern that people were actually bringing to the workplace. And even as many people had not returned to our physical facilities and were still working remote, there was still this sense that we've got to put these things out there, and we got to have some discussion about what's happening, because if we don't, then we won't get past this. And I'm proud to say that several of those departments expressed a great deep sense of accomplishment, because they knew it was the hard work they had to do. And for me, it became, not just a hashtag, but really became sort of a way to operate. It's do the work. That work comes from being open to other perspectives, other ideas, even if they are in complete conflict with your own. That's where I see this being most valuable.
That's very helpful, Marcus. Go ahead, Angela.
I was just going to add, I absolutely agree with the statements and Kiana's statement that it's both. We tend to think of an inclusive culture as our leaders enabling that culture, but it's our associates that bring it to life.
It's a great point. So this is the last question I have for you all before I move to some of the chat questions. I'd like each one of you to respond to this in a very brief way, if you would. What advice do you have for the audience listening in today regarding creating a more inclusive workplace and bringing about change? It all sounds great. You all are very experienced in this work. It's probably over 50, 60 years of expertise on the line. You get it. You've done it. How can everybody else do it?
Marlon, I think it starts with building a trusting environment. I think a trusting environment is a cornerstone for that inclusive culture. And I mentioned it earlier, and I think it bears mentioning again. You have to have that unwavering commitment for the long term for this work. You have to invest the time, energy, effort, and resources for this D&I journey. And then enjoy the journey. There's going to be some bumps along the way. There's going to be some wins. You need to celebrate those wins along the way and recognize when and where you may need to go deeper in some places.
I want to add to what Beverly, with what Angela said. I want to pinpoint that notion that as a journey, it is a journey of discovery. And you take people on that journey, not just for the sake of the journey, but to actually look at the things that are going to be the most impactful for them. We probably aren't going to have any time to discuss this today, but even thinking about the various levels of personal, institutional, and structural racism, you think about what some people are really struggling with, and that is these things that I learned when I was young, these things that I experienced in my lived experience. Now I'm being told they weren't really authentic. That's where the discovery really has the greatest possibilities for change. And I'm seeing people start to open themselves to this idea, not that everything was bad or evil that they were taught, but that they have to take them in full measure. And that's where the growth comes in, and that's where the change takes place.
So,
Great point.
Marlon, I don't want to simplify it because that's a big question. Where does someone start? And again, it starts with the person. I mean, that's kind of that's a no-brainer, but you're going to have to take it piece by piece, department by department, organization by organization. And you've got to start with the why. Why are we doing this? And ensuring that the person and or the department or the organization understands, here's where it ties to you. What's in it for me? What's in it for your organization? What's in it for your company? You tie that with the how, and then you tie that with your milestones, with wrapped in a blanket of you've got the commitment from the folks around you to say you can move along on this journey. And it's not going to happen overnight. It starts with one conversation to my group, to a listening tour, to say, here's what we want to see different in the next 15 months, 12 months, and then it goes from there.
Yeah.
Great point.
And for me, I'll just double down really quickly on Beverly's why and Angela's leadership engagement. So, rooting the work in who you are as an organization, your North Star as an organization, who your customers are is so essential to starting the work. And then you really can't pay short shrift to that leadership engagement, right? It's not enough just to say my CEO, is bought in. That CEO needs to figure out where they are on the journey, right? What does their leadership team look like? How do they feel about conversations about race? How do they feel about conversations around gender, right? Because people are going to be looking at that person. They're going to be looking at their senior team. They're going to have questions. And if that leader hasn't done their own work to understand where they are on the journey, then it won't feel authentic to folks. And so really spending some time at that leadership level, like Angela talks about, and making sure that they're where they need to be before you start to cascade it to other levels is so critical.
Those are all great points. Thank you all so much. Okay, I love it. What's your why? North Star, building trust. If we had more time, Angela, I would come back. You know what? Actually, I'm going to do that, Angela, because if I was sitting in the audience, I would be saying to myself, wow, trust is very important. And I'd like to create an environment where trust is present. But how do you build trust? So Angela, Kiana, Marcus, just really quick. I mean, we know it's important, but how do you do it? Tell me how to build trust.
I think it starts with open and transparent communications. And again, that has to start at the top. They have to see your teams, your group, your organization has to see from the very high levels that it is open and transparent communication. So our CEO and OCEO are very accessible. They have oftentimes have coffee chats with our associates, and we talk openly about being transparent, sharing what we can as soon as we can, and even coming out and saying, we'll have a town hall meeting and say, look, we're having this because we want to share with you what we know today, but we don't have all the answers, for example, in response to COVID, but we're keeping you updated as we are. And that's how, in my opinion, you begin to build that culture of trust.
Well, the only thing I'll add to that is, because I think that's spot on, is what we did is we actually, again, going back to the data, is we took the temperature to see what was the current state of trust in our organization. So one of the things that we did with our engagement survey is we built a trust index within our engagement survey so that we could measure how our associates felt from a trust standpoint. Do they feel like they can trust the person who's next to them? Do they feel like they can trust their manager? Do they feel like they can trust the senior executive team? And then we broke our trust index down again by demographic groups. And then we took that data and we did some listening sessions. So we did some focus groups and some listening tours with our senior leaders and our associates to unpack what people were saying in the survey, to unpack what do people really mean when they say, I have concerns around trust. What does trust look like to you? And so then from there, we were able to then put the things in place that Angela talks about, right? So you got to get really clear about how people are defining these things so that you don't come in with your own lens and say, oh, this is what trust looks like, and I'm going to do this for people. Getting really clear about, how our associates were defining it was really important for us.
Hey, Marlon, can I just build on something Angela said around this whole question of how do you do it? None of us are able to do the things that we're doing or will be able to do the things we're doing until we understand what people are thinking and how they're feeling. So you've heard all of us talk about there's got to be some level of measurement and understanding of what's really in the minds of our colleagues and our associates and our leaders and our communities, in my case, from a city perspective. And so just recently, very similar to, I think, Kiana, I think you mentioned the survey, the City of Columbus conducted an employee engagement survey. And Angela, to your point, or no, I'm sorry, Kiana, to your point, one of the questions on there that just kind of struck me, and it was interesting to see the answers, is do you have any friends here at work? Do you relate to people at work? How do you see? And so trying to peel that back to understand, are people bringing their best selves to this organization on a daily basis? Do they feel like they're isolated? Are they empowered? And until we understand that, whoever asked that question in the chat box, until you know who and what you're dealing with, you can't move forward with any of the changes that we're talking about. So that's incredibly important, is to have a baseline. And the baseline may be taking a couple of folks in your department out and having a conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I want to move to some questions that came in really quick. Thank you all for those very thoughtful responses. Marcus, I'll let you chime in on this one first, but it's related to supplier diversity. And we know that diverse suppliers bring innovation. They help us with our products and or services. They help drive economic inclusion. But, and I'm not saying this is the case, this is a question that came in anonymously to me. What do you do when they're, and I know it's different for you in your industry, but how do you deal with the fact that it may be difficult to find diverse suppliers, or when you do, their pricing is high? How do you navigate that world?
So that's kind of a trick question for me because of my previous background. I will say formally that there are diverse suppliers that provide almost everything in almost every sector, and candidly, I believe that people have just decided flat out that they don't want to do the work to identify those suppliers and simply say that they're usually more expensive. Oftentimes, what people find is diverse suppliers, and I'm using that term very, very, very broadly, are often out of necessity very competitive in their pricing because they have to be to get opportunity. You can't build a business if you don't have customers. You can't get customers if you can't price your products and services well. And so a lot of times I hear people say, and this goes back to the hoary old days when people believed that it was a negative to have to use diverse suppliers. The reality is, these suppliers have to be price competitive, or else they'll never get business. And I think that our future is going to show up as needing to have even more diversity, because you have to look at the demographics. And again, that's where the data comes into play. I mean, the data is going to tell you, where you're going to fall short. And I'll add one other dimension: the economic impact from a community standpoint. All communities lose when there's not diversity in the provision of services in a community. You can't put people to work if you don't have jobs available. Those jobs are not coming from the large, corporate organizations. They're coming from those individuals who put their capital at risk, that create opportunity, that are providing services in communities and neighborhoods. That's why it's so important to think about this, not just from a diversity for diversity's sake, but how are we going to benefit our community? How are we going to generate the kind of ability people need to care for themselves and their families?
Marlon, can I build on something Marquise just said? Because I think it's important as we look at our supplier diversity arm, our small minority women-owned businesses. One of the things that we had to do on the onset of COVID, and all of us were impacted with, and our small businesses, which make up, I believe, and again, don't quote me on the stat, but I think it's 80% of the businesses in Columbus are small minority and women-owned businesses are here. And the impact of what this pandemic is doing to them. This office had to take a moment and look at how do we enable them? Again, going back to my enablement comment, we had to help them pivot, because we recognize, like Marquis said, it's an economic imperative for us to help them do that. So we did a couple of things. We launched Doing Business with the City, which is a simplified vendor and contractor services management system. We're trying to put that in a portal. We've developed a directory so others outside of the city can access this. Something that was interesting and innovative that we did, because we recognize a lot of people in our brick and mortar couldn't survive during COVID. So we helped enable them through our partnerships with Google to help them pivot and to create an online marketplace for their businesses so they can sell their goods and services even during a pandemic, so we can continue to drive that revenue. It didn't stop with Google. Now we're also helping them do marketplaces on Amazon. So above and beyond their traditional brick and mortar, we're saying as an office, it's incumbent upon us to enable, to attract, and to grow, help them grow their businesses. So it's just not the metric of I've grown my certifications by 40%. I want to see and help them grow their business by X% as well. So we're extending ourselves beyond the traditional, you are now certified with the city and come to try to get some business with us.
Well, now I want to build a little bit on, Beverly's point about enablement, because one of the best practices from an innovation standpoint that I've seen in auto manufacturing is actually standing up minority-owned businesses, right? So they look at areas where there is a dearth of suppliers, and they make conscious efforts to help build up businesses led by people of color or women, right? So where there's nobody operating in the space presently, they are intentional about connecting to people who are entrepreneurial minds, who have entrepreneurial mindsets, and helping them build their business, right? And so that's another opportunity. So where people are saying, I can't find X, Y, and Z, there are places where you can tap into, right? Like we have business incubation organizations locally here in Columbus. Tap into those. Those have people who have entrepreneurial mindsets, and they just may need a little, kind of wind behind their back to stand up something that actually could be a benefit to your organization, actually could be, the next big company. A lot of things that we have to remember is there has been historically so much bias in procurement processes, in access to capital, so on and so forth, that the reason why they may not exist is because they haven't been able to get over those hurdles. And if your company was willing to see that, you may see some different outcomes.
Hey, Marlon, I want to add something to Kiana, and I'm going to be quiet at this point, because you're right about access to capital and support and partnerships. And again, going back to this pandemic, and we're still in it. And we recognize that there are a lot of small businesses and people, these are people. This is our community. And we have to ensure or find a way to help them stand up so they can continue to survive past this pandemic. And one of the things that we did was we worked with the Ohio's Bankers League, the Ohio MBE, as well as our Department of Development to help a lot of the small businesses get access to the CARES Act funding. So we were able to help over 150 companies get access to that they as small businesses. And like Kiana said, we have to help bring them to the table so they can get those funds so they can survive and continue this model for the entire community.
Yeah, so thank you all for that. I appreciate the input. And thank you all for being willing to have the discussion about supplier diversity in this panel. As we move towards 10:30, I want to coin this new section of the discussion as the keep it real portion of the conversation. I don't think that was anywhere on the agenda, but you know, we've been flexing all day. So keep it real. Angela, I'm gonna start with you. After seeing the George, I'll say specifically, the George Floyd video, and as a Chief Diversity Officer, two-part question, be very brief if you don't mind, if you can, but how did you feel? And then what was your call to action? What did you feel compelled to do after watching that video?
So it's a big question. I will try to be brief. So I think before I could even get to CDO, I will say as a Black woman, a mother of a Black son, wife of a Black man, I felt a range of emotions. It was the longest 8 minutes and 46 seconds of my life. Getting past those emotions and also leading this effort as a CDO, which is also heavy work, had to really bring our nationwide community together around this. You know, there were some that didn't quite understand. There were some that were just outraged inside. There was still that same range of emotions. And so what quickly did, it's like, how can we bring folks together in unity? So organized a standing in unity moving forward together rally where we brought associates together outside in front of the nationwide arena to kind of experience and better understand what was going on in the Black community. And it was a really beautiful thing because all generations, different race and ethnic groups, we had about 600 of our associates there in person, socially distancing with masks and things. And then another, we live streamed it to the other associates, but we received incredible feedback about how moving and how needed that was, not only in the Black community, but for all of our associates.
Thank you for that, Angela. Kiana, how'd you feel and what'd you feel compelled to do? What was your call to action?
Yeah, so, similar to Angela, right? Your first reaction is as, a Black person, I'm also the mother of an African-American male. And so, I thought about my child, right? I thought about my child, going out into this world every single day. And so, I'm a closet writer. And so, I wrote a post on LinkedIn to kind of exercise all the emotions that I was feeling because I actually was on tap when everything was when George Floyd was murdered. And so after I wrote my post, I then reached out to our CEO and said, we need to say something, right? We need to say something to our entire organization. And so, worked with him and our communications team to get a message out to our organization. And then very similar to Angela, kind of put some other things in place. One of the things that I'll call out in specific is at that point, African-American associates were saying to me, we are exhausted. People are coming to us and asking us to explain 400 years of racism, and I can't do it, right? I need people, I'm still trying to process. And so we immediately stood up some sessions that were really focused on educating white folks about what was going on from not only a race standpoint, but racism. So we had 6 virtual sessions where we just had really frank and honest conversations about what white people could do in this moment to be catalysts for change, right? It was really about let's to your point, keep it real, but let's shift the conversation so that the focus isn't on Black folks in this moment, but it's really about how white people can be allies.
Yeah, that's great. Bring people together. Marcus, any thoughts from you?
Well, I honestly, I couldn't watch the video, but with all that went on as a result of George Floyd's death, I really went back inside and thought about a lot of the things that I was taught, by my mother who taught Black history, the things that I learned through my time at Ohio State, working with Nick Nelson and the programs that he established there and the speakers that he brought that helped me center myself in my own experience. And then I thought, well, this is the moment where we have to have these courageous conversations. And that actually helped me remove myself from the need to make it about how I felt and really frame it in terms of what needed to be done now, because if these conversations don't take place, people were going to internalize their anger, and they were not going to be healthy enough to actually move us to the place we need to go. That was the approach that I took in working with those departments I mentioned before.
Yeah, thank you for that, Marcus. Beverly?
So Marlon, again, just like Angela and Kiana was saying, I'm a mother of an African-American son that's been pulled over 7 times by the police. I'm a mother of an African-American man that gets followed in the stores every time he goes into the store. So I have this context of knowing that these happen, but yet here I am in this particular role trying to enact change. And I knew that after, and I, again, like Marquis said, I didn't want to watch it. You don't want to visually see something so disgusting and so real. But it also, I prompted myself to not have a knee-jerk reaction. And from this position, one of the things that we've emphasized again is leadership starts from the top, and the tone is set from the top. And one of the things that this city has done, especially with this mayor, he has not shied away from, through the encouragement of his departments as well as his communications team, as Kiana said, that this is about ensuring that people know that this is intolerable, this is disgusting, and he's made it very clear where he stands as the leader of this city and where we stand as we move forward and continue to move forward in this journey. It doesn't change what happened there, but we want to make sure that this is what we know, we feel, and where we can, we're going to start to eradicate and impact systemic racism. Because again, that's what led to that.
Yeah, that's powerful.
That's a very important point. And at our rally, did the same thing. It's in those times, I think that it is critically important for the organization's leaders to be seen and heard about where they sit on issues such as that. So at the rally, our CEO spoke and our board chairman was also there and spoke. And it was really important that they do that. So it's clear that we clearly denounce racism in any form, and making crystal clear that all of our associates understood and heard that from our most senior leaders. So I could not agree with you more there, Beverly.
Yep.
Yeah. So listen, you all, those are all great responses. I got one last question in the keep it real section, and I want you to keep it real on this last one. Actually, this will be my final question for this morning's session. If you could answer within 30 seconds, that would be phenomenal. If you could. And I'm going to start with you, Kiana, and Beverly. I'm going to end with you as our host.
Okay.
So Kiana, and keeping it real, if I could grant you one successful outcome for the work you're doing today, what would it be?
Wow, Marlon, 30 seconds. So, so I'm really focused, and I think Marcus talked about this around kind of the economic impact of the work that we're doing. And so, we've heard a lot around pay equity, so on and so forth. And so, the way that I've been thinking about this is really about even, broader than pay equity, right? It's the fact that, people of color and to a degree women actually start even further behind. And so pay equity is only half of the discussion. So, for me, it would be about how do we really transform the economic aspects of the work that we're doing to create, some people want to call it reparations, whatever it is, but to really create a level playing field for people of color, right? So how do we right those old wrongs? And so we're looking at that right now from, a pay standpoint and an economic impact standpoint for our vendors, but also for our associates as well.
All right, Kiana, thank you. You did it. Fair enough. Marcus, one outcome is yours. What is it?
It's to establish true racial equity where we define it as an environment where everyone has what they need to thrive, not having what you have, but having what they need, so that it really becomes less about the haves and the have-nots, but more about the ability to have those services available in their communities where they need them, when they need them. And that is really, to me, it's almost the penultimate of what this work is all about.
Excellent.
Making sure that is imperative for everything that goes on from this day forward.
And one example of this in the global development sector is the Usaid biodata form.
Essentially, you have to write down your salary history for the last 3 years. And so if you are sending your biodata to a recruiter, the moment they open it and they look at your salary history, it's essentially them anchoring to that information. And from kind of that point on, regardless of if it's a much higher position, if it's a much riskier position, if it's a much more technical position, it almost doesn't matter because the recruiter's mind has anchored to this information that you've provided to them.
Becoming aware of your unconscious bias can often be the hardest step. The first thing to do is look back at when you've made decisions at work that might have been influenced by your unconscious bias. Think about the particular situation you were in when you made the decision and how the decision-making could be improved if you were more aware of your bias. Step 2, find your trigger. Write a list of situations when you are most likely to experience these unconscious biases. Is it in meetings or before a particularly tough decision? Does it happen over email or when you talk to a specific group or person? Maybe it's when you're in certain moods, like when you're hungry, stressed, or tired. Step 3, slow down. Next time you notice a trigger, try giving yourself a minute to pause and consider your response before instantly reacting.
So a great way to turn off that older part of your brain that makes these automatic snap judgments is simply to take 3 deep breaths. And you want to take, full breaths. So breathe in, then breathe out, and then count. And that helps you to calm down and turn off that fight or flight part of your brain and get back to the more normal part of your brain that can make a more rational decision.
Step 4, do one small thing differently. You could ask a different person to kick off each meeting, or after a meeting, ask for feedback from someone who wasn't vocal and seriously consider their opinion. Once you've implemented this action, take note and give yourself some deserved recognition for tackling your unconscious bias. Research shows that positive emotions help to cement things as habits. Now you know what unconscious bias is, maybe you can think of a time when it affected a decision you've made, or perhaps you've experienced the consequences of someone else's bias. Let us know your thoughts by commenting on the video, and you can look back at all the content we produced for the Global Dev Women campaign on devx.com.
Welcome to another episode of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. I've read your emails, I've heard you, so I'm going to start this episode a little bit different by reading an email that gave me hope, changed my life, and I promise it'll do the same for you. Lynn wrote, "Dear Manuel, I grew up in the 1940s. My family were good people who were unconsciously racist. Negro was a term we used. Racism, like religion, was drummed into me. It's hard every day to choose not to judge, but I'm listening. I'm 73 and I'm still learning. Don't give up on people like me. I'm awake now and determined to wake others up. Bless you, my brother and my son." Well, Lynn, I won't give up on you. And that's why I'm back here in our safe space to have another uncomfortable conversation. You see, so many of y'all have sent emails and I've read them, and there are 3 consistent themes and questions that have been asked that I want to address. The first being, well, Emmanuel, what about the broken Black family? What about the lack of Black fathers? Isn't that the biggest contributing factor to the lack of success for Black people? Statistically, you may be right. 64% of Black people grow up in a home with one parent, as opposed to 24% of white people. Growing up in a single-parent home, it makes you 4 times more likely to be impoverished, twice as likely to drop out of school, and significantly more likely to end up in jail. But I thought about and I realized it's not that Black people don't know how to love. It's not that Black people don't know how to commit. Think about the history. The initial fracture in the broken Black family, the initial fracture in the Black home, it started with slavery. Prior to 1865, remember, Black people were viewed as property. not people. When Black people wanted to engage in marriages, they were called abroad marriages because the husband may belong to one owner while the wife and children belonged to another. And as a result, the husband would only be able to see his family on Wednesdays and Saturdays, so long as his owner, his master, permitted. So when I think about that, I understand that this fracture in the broken Black family, the reason it exists to a degree is because marriage has only been allowed, has been lawful for Black people for 5 generations. To put that in context, my grandparents wouldn't have been allowed to be married. I don't say that as an excuse, but I say that to give you understanding, my white brothers and sisters. I say that to give you empathy, my white brothers and sisters. You know, another question I get asked, well, Emmanuel, if I as a white woman want to wear braids, how do I know that I'm not being offensive? What is this concept of cultural appropriation? And I think about 2 things. In the late 1800s, Jim Crow laws were formed and they disenfranchised Black people. But you want to know where the name Jim Crow came from? It came from a main character in Black minstrel shows, where a white person would paint on Black face and take a red lipstick and draw big red lips on their mouth, because full lips, were a distinguishing trait of Black people. And they would take these traits and mimic and mock Black people. And traits that have been used and attributes and parts of Black culture that were once mimicked and mocked and made a fool of are now celebrated when a white person does it. In 2020, in the doctor's office, lip injections, they occur every 20 minutes. Beyond that, plagiarism, it's always been viewed as offensive when we all realize that. So while imitation may be the highest form of flattery, plagiarism, that is problematic. So wearing braids as a white person or borrowing Black culture, that's not the issue. Just make sure you know the history and make sure that you cite your sources. You know, another question I received, well, Emmanuel, what about reverse racism? Black people get Black History Month, but white people, we don't get a White History Month. To that I submit this. White people and white culture, it has always been esteemed in America. Me as a Black man, I navigate America. I navigate America as a visitor, whereas for white people, it's home. And so Black people, we often try to find ways to band together to celebrate and esteem our culture, to celebrate and esteem ourselves. But when you think about racism, there are 3 components: power, privilege, and prejudice. 2 of those things Black people historically never had. I played in the NFL for the Philadelphia Eagles, and my first year on that team, there was a defensive lineman, 6'4", 320 pounds. And every single day, for whatever reason, he would bully me, make a joke about this, make fun of me for that. And one day after practice, I finally stood my ground. And I said, "You are the worst teammate I have ever encountered." You see, I stood up for myself. It would be foolish to say, "Emmanuel, you are being a reverse bully." Just imagine how silly that sounds. In the same manner, Black people, all we've tried to do is stand up and esteem ourselves, stand up and band together. That's why we refer to each other often as Black kings and as Black queens, because a society and a culture that has forever tried to tear us down, we realize we have to depend on each other to lift one another up. I want to end this episode in the same manner in which I started, with an email that I received. This came from a sweet friend, Renee. She said, 2 weeks ago, Emmanuel, I was completely hopeless and deep in despair, fearing for my Black son's life and the helplessness that was destroying my will to fight and live another day. Then my sister posted your first episode and something changed in me. You showed me that there's hope for us. The example you are setting for my son is showing that strength is not in anger, it's in action. Your message filled my heart with hope, and so I say thank you. Change is coming, and it starts with you. Now, while that email was addressed to me, it really was addressed to you, because change is coming, and it starts with you. So for that, I say thank you. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. I see your emails. I hear your emails. Continue to converse with me. Continue to dine with me in our safe space.
All right. Welcome back to those who stepped away for a break. If you didn't, wow, those videos are really good. I love the unconscious bias one, about how we see and think things that are informed from so many different angles. And we'll include the link to that because I think that's a video really worth showing in our professional spaces and talking about as teams. But the conversations with a Black man, and there's a number of videos in the series, and we'll link those to you or when we send out the resources after this conference in the next few days. So much power there, like the last conversation we were having with all the chief diversity officers, this real rich mixture of personal experience and all of the power and the honesty and rawness that we get from that, with really intelligent and strategic responses that call people in, not just call people out. He does such a great job doing that. I love those. All right, we are going to move into our opportunity to interact together. We're not all chief diversity officers. We don't all have a team working on this under us. We don't all have a budget or 8 hours a day that we're allotted to specifically think about this. Hopefully your organization does, and I know many of them do, and many of you belong to the organizations represented by the folks who spoke on the last panel. But what is going to make this time effective for each one of us and create the opportunity for us to become change agents in our own spaces is talking together and figuring out with one another, what does that actually look like? So you should have received an email this morning with the links to those breakout questions so that everybody's got them. You don't have to follow that order. You don't have to start at the first one. You don't even have to use that. If you've got someone in your breakout session that has their own question that they want to interact over, please do that. The point of the breakout session is that you own it, and we're bringing the conversation into your spaces. So we're going to do this from about right now, 10:48 until about 11:15 or so, right in there. So that's your time frame until about 11:15. Then we're going to gather back together for 8 or 9, maybe even 10 minutes and talk about, give you the chance to shoot back into the chat box some of your learning. What were some of the trending topics and themes, and how did people put legs to this conversation in their own space? So right now, we're going to head into the breakout rooms. You don't have to do anything. You'll get invited into a breakout room. And then when it's time, I'll call you back into the main room. So you don't have to do anything techie on your end. And then I will broadcast into your groups the link for the chat questions if you missed that earlier. So you'll see that kind of flash up as a text box. You can copy and paste that out. Okay, here we go. See you soon. As you're coming back into the main session, I'd love for you to start typing into the chat box on the side. What'd you talk about? None of us had the privilege of being in every one of those conversations. And I bet in every one of those conversations, there was something meaningful that we can transpose into our experiences, our sphere of influence, to be an impact player and be a part of making transformational change and creating inclusive space. So as you're coming back in, go ahead and hit that chat box. What's something you talked about in your breakout room from today, or maybe a culmination of ideas from across the conference? And I'm going to start just kind of reading them out as I see them. But this is really your opportunity to share with other people in the conference what you talked about. And then, of course, at the end of our conference, once everyone else logs off, I'll copy and paste that out and see if there are kind of some big ideas, and we'll get those back to you. Again, we won't give out any names, so feel comfortable with your privacy and security. But respect is something one of the groups talked about. Change is not easy work. Ain't that the truth? Individually or corporately. The HR process and bias. Yeah. I think, from my perspective, a lot of the work I do is around unconscious bias, and it's gotten a bad name because everyone's just sick to death of doing unconscious bias training. And I get it. And it's so often still the front door for people to say, oh, I didn't even realize. And then you've got this huge open room to explore once somebody says, oh, I didn't even realize. But that's tough. when sending information about applicants using blind data or blinding out data, names, colleges, et cetera. Yeah, so important. There's an app, I think it's called Textio. Maybe I'll try to include it in the resource group, but you can put your job description through this app and it'll spit back out to you whether you write your competencies and role descriptions in masculine or feminine language or language traditionally assigned in terms of how men and women respond to certain kinds of terms and roles. So you can even get a sense of, what you're using sending out. We'll try to include that. Commitment, inclusiveness with my group, respect and open communication is critical to changing culture, standing in someone else's shoes. So good. That empathy that our CDO panel started out talking about, right? We had a good conversation about short-term versus long-term change. Oh, wow. Yeah, that happened yesterday. One of the groups brought timing into the mix and talked about kind of the nuance and the layers that brings. So good. And how transformational change is hard to do in a government context. Yeah, I think transformational change is hard to do in every context, right? So not to say that you're not right, you are right, and both and. I think in every situation we're in, there are specific layers that we have to learn how to peel back. And I know in the public sector, things like unions that can make certain kinds of decision-making more challenging, or a really broad sort of spectrum of roles and responsibilities. It can be hard to connect around people feeling like they belong to the decision-making group or not, and lots of other things. Taking inventory on where you are and where you want to be takes time and intention. Yeah. People are relevant. Yes. Coaching leadership to model the role in D&I. Oh, that's so good. That was such a good moment, right? Learning, helping coach up your leaders. Again, that idea of calling in. Oh, you guys are so awesome. You had great conversation. Hiring for soft skills and competencies. Oh, these are so good. Hearing others' stories of life and what helps to build empathy in relationships while breaking down walls. That's so good. Employees are more than just the job they do. Wow. Great, great, great. Keep those rolling in. Those are so fantastic. HR Transformation, Building Human Resources from the Outside In. Oh, yeah, there's a book. HR Transformation, Building Human Resources from the Outside In. Great read. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think maybe that's Yolanda that mentioned that. So at this time, you can feel free to keep chatting those out, and because I'll copy and paste those. So those are ideas and resources that may go out to everybody. So feel free to get your ideas in, because we want your voice to be a part of this. I want to pass the microphone over to Dr. Beverly Stallings Johnson once again, and
Yes.
allow her to make some closing remarks before we show a final video and hit end meeting for all, which I can't believe we're going to do on the 3 days.
No, I can't believe 3 days. Can you hear me? Great. Okay. I want to first apologize to everyone for the horrible Wi-Fi in the world that affected me at the apex of what I wanted to say in that last CDO panel. But here we are. And I think that this is an example of pivoting and being able to rise to the occasion and keep moving, because nothing that you think is scripted will ever go the way that you want. And that's always the same. That's the same for what we're trying to do from a diversity and inclusion perspective. But simply, guys, and I'm going to kind of take this down. I started this whole session with Daniel when I said, I want to make sure that this is a good investment of your time. And the ROI on this, I think, has been self-evident. We've talked about it. Daniel has highlighted several things after each session to say, here's what we heard. And your chat box is indicative of, I'm thinking folks are feeling pretty good, not to mention a few of the emails that have already were sent to me yesterday and before that. But I also wanted to just also take a moment and say sincerely, we want to thank you. It is not easy to take 3 half days of your time to come on a Zoom call, be attentive, and then participate. It takes some effort, which also says there's a willingness and a desire to learn, and that's what you did. And that's where we're trying to go with D&I in this city, and Marquise's organization in Chicago, and Angela's and others. We recognize that you got to have the participants. You have to be willing. You have to step in and step up. And I applaud everyone on this call for doing this by even coming to this call to at least listen and to see if there's something different, and to give you the aha moments to help you move forward in your journey in your organization. So again, on behalf of the mayor, myself, and the entire office in ODI, thank you for coming to this event. This is the first of many symposiums. Hopefully, we're going to do them biannually. A little infomercial here, and we are going to be doing the Small Business Conference next year. So every other year, we're going to be alternating, focus on workforce and then small business. We've heard from all of our thought leaders, our public-private sector. We know there is a lot more that you could probably ask us. So Daniel owns the task of making sure that you get all of the information at the end of this. But I also want to thank our other sponsors who stepped up and stepped in for this event. Franklin County, the city of Dayton, and of course the city of Toledo. All of the mayors that were on our panels and the speakers who loaned us their time, their expertise. Again, this wasn't easy to just take 4 hours out of your day for 3 days to do this. We know we have emails piling up that we all have to go back and respond to. But again, this is the beginning. This is a building. We want to model the behaviors that we'd like to see replicated elsewhere. And hopefully this office and the things that we've shared with you today is an example of that. So lastly, again, I want to thank you, Daniel, for your excellent facilitation. That's a heck of a mic right there, guys. You know, I think we all need that mic when we do our Zoom calls. But I did want to just take a moment to do that. And my workforce team, I don't know if you guys can see Katrina and Jordan. They're both on this call. And, you know, I can't say small but mighty enough. But I just want you to imagine those three faces. That's who put all of this together. So congratulations to you for a successful 36 hours of power. You know, guys, I think you know me, I like taglines. It's 36 hours of power is what we brought to you. So with that said, I'm going to stop because, again, the ROI of this is always giving you information that you can use. So Daniel's going to close it, but we're going to also leave you with another insight video. And I'm hoping you're taking note of this because it's like multiple speakers that we're bringing you in those 10-minute videos. So again, Daniel, ball's back to you.
I am Linda Hill. I am a professor at Harvard Business School and the faculty chair of the Leadership Initiative. You do not get innovation usually without diversity and conflict. And we talk about building a capability that we refer to as creative abrasion, and others have referred to this before that way. Again, we've known for a long time, if you want innovation, you got to get the ideas out and they need to abrade against each other. Well, many leaders will say to us, I don't want conflict, you know, and frankly, I don't know that I want a whole lot of diversity. So when I'm talking about diversity, I'm actually talking about diversity in how we see things, how we approach that particular problem, whatever. These things are not necessarily comfortable, but you need to fundamentally, as a leader, if you want to get innovation, you have to amplify the differences in your organization, not minimize them. Now, if you're focused on execution, you kind of want to minimize things and you want to standardize, right? So one of the pressures we face as leaders and why leadership is so hard is that when you're thinking about execution and the choices you make, it's going to be different than when you're thinking about innovation and the choices you make to some extent. One of the leaders said to us, Linda, nowadays, people don't want to follow you to the future. They want to co-create the future with you. And so, yes, a leader can hopefully be able to do both of these things. But as I said, it's hard to do one, it's hard to do the other, and to be able to be good at both, which is why we also see very much in most organizations a focus on the leadership team, not just the individual leader, as being able to do this. And there's other research that suggests today, if you cannot build a really robust leadership team, you will derail as an executive because you can't pull it off alone. Anyone who believes he or she can pull it off without significant support from some other top executives, to include Chief Technology Officer, Chief Innovation Officer, Chief Human Resource Officer, whoever it might be, it just doesn't happen these days very well.
To get the best ideas, to create the deepest change, we amplify our differences, not minimize them. And, you know, it's been said that we seek to talk about our differences until they don't feel quite so different anymore. And I hope this 3-day conference for you has been an invitation in to thinking about not just diversity and representation in numbers across your team, and that's important, but also about what it means to call people into an environment of trust and safety and respect and change, agility and empathy and possibility. I love that word from the director, right? What's possible if, and then we gather our team together and see what happens. Thank you so much for being here. The last thing we want to do is take a picture. So if you want to go to the grid view, I'm going to unpin my video so you can see everybody. If you go to the grid view and turn on your camera, if you've got a Govern box, hold your Govern swag box if you got it in the mail. If you didn't get it in the mail, you're getting one. So don't worry. They're on the way. We had to do a second order because people kept signing up for this conference. I don't know what was going on. That's a good problem to have. So we'll take a couple screenshots. Hold that box up. If you don't have a box, feel free to just wave or smile or do whatever suits you to do that. And I know our team, Jordan's going to take some screenshots.
Yes. So
I'll
hold
join
on a
this.
sec here. And I got to go through a couple screens here because I have more than one screen.
Yeah, there's a lot of people. Keep posing. Just a couple more hours, everyone. Just keep posing.
There's one.
All right. J.R. Watts, show up something. You're in the middle.
All right, everyone, we are so thrilled for your participation, and I would love to keep hanging out with you, but we're going to let you go because you got a real life to get back to. Thank you. Reach out to us if we can be supportive in your journey in any way. Look for more resources coming from us, as well as a survey about your experience and how you can help us make it better for you next time. Thank you. Travel safely to wherever you're going next, and be well. Bye-bye.